Katie, did you know that each month more than half of kids experience issues like cyberbullying, sexting, or display signs of depression or self-harm?
No, but Brian, I'm not surprised. That's something I really worry about for kids today because there's so much pressure on social media.
And fortunately for parents, there's now a solution called Bark. Bark's algorithms detect and alert parents to concerning social media or text messages and provides expert advice on how to address issues with kids. If you have or know someone that has kids with a phone or an iPod, or you're on social media, you can help protect them at www.bark.us. Bark's protection is only $9 a month per family, but use promo code
Katie.
You'll get 3 months for free to try it out. That's bark.us and use the promo code KATIE. Katie, have you bought any sofas lately?
Actually, I have because I'm moving into a new apartment. It takes forever. You know, sometimes it's hard to customize it to get just the sofa you want.
You wait 12 to 16 weeks for the sofa to arrive. Benchmade Modern is changing all of that. They make beautiful, custom-sized sofas at affordable prices. Here's how it works. You choose from one of 8 base collections. You select your configuration, either a love seat, a sectional, a regular sofa. You choose your custom dimensions. Choose one of their 65-plus fabric and leather options. It's that simple. Buying a sofa can be stressful, but Benchmade Modern makes the entire experience fun. So go to benchmademodern.com and use the code
Katie
to receive 10% off your order.
It's hard to believe that it was 8 years ago this week when I did perhaps one of the most important interviews of my career. That was when I sat down with Governor Sarah Palin, who was here in New York City for the UN General Assembly because she was running for Vice President of the United States. As we remember, she was John McCain's running mate. And she had done a few sit-down interviews, actually 2, but had really limited them to major network interviews. So this was a very big deal for me because it was a big opportunity to sort of peel the layers of the onion and discover what made Sarah Palin tick. And I couldn't have done it without the help of my trusty colleague, Brian Goldsmith. Brian is one of the smartest guys I know. He's sort of my consigliere. Did I say that right, Brian?
Consigliere.
See, I have to ask Brian everything. Where would I be without him?
I've just seen The Godfather. I've just seen The Godfather too many times.
You're more of a godson than a godfather because you're only 34 years old. Let's be honest. Brian, did you realize that it was 8 years ago this week when you were in the room where it happened, as they said in Hamilton, and sat down and interviewed Governor Sarah Palin?
I didn't realize it was 8 years ago this week until you mentioned it a few minutes ago. Of course, that interview gets mentioned all the time. I think it's probably one of the 2 most significant political interviews ever done on television, the other being...
Wait, what's the other, Brian?
Roger Mudd's
I know.
infamous interview of Ted Kennedy in which he couldn't answer the question, very complicated question, why are you running for president?
That was something, wasn't it?
It was. The questions were a little more nuanced and complicated for Governor Palin, but what struck me in the aftermath of that interview, considering all the criticism that she got, is that not a single big-name Republican, not a single McCain aide or advisor said to you any of these questions were unfair or unwarranted. It was really all about her answers. She kind of buried herself as a national political candidate in a single interview, which was a pretty remarkable thing to watch.
Let's take our listeners behind the scenes a little bit because we spent many days in what we call in my apartment, my daughters and I, our red room. Now, listeners, don't think it's like the Red Room of Pain and 50 Shades of Grey. It's anything but. It happens to be a den/library that I painted this kind of not very nice shade of kind of rose when I bought this apartment after my husband passed away in 1998. I wanted this to be a happy place to raise my girls, who were only 6 and 2 at the time. And so, Brian, we spent a lot of time in that room really going through the kinds of questions we thought would be important to ask Governor Palin. And I think you and I, what do you remember from those days other than you couldn't wait to get out of my apartment?
Wanting to open the window to that library, freshen the place up a little bit.
It's only on the second floor, so good luck with that.
I remember the two of us thinking, this is somebody who only had been a governor for about 18 months at the time. Before that was a small town mayor. And here she was in a position to be one heartbeat away from the most powerful office on earth. And so we didn't want to hold her to an artificially high standard or to a different standard, but we did want to hold her to the same standard as other people who had sought that office before. We wanted to give our viewers who didn't know much about Sarah Palin a sense of who she was, what she believed, and how she would approach this extraordinarily important job. And we divvied up the interview between foreign policy questions, economic policy questions, and questions about social issues.
So the first one was really focused on foreign policy and economic issues. And then later I did a second interview in Ohio when she was there for a campaign appearance. And that's when I asked that question that seems to be so remembered in this interview, despite the fact that we talked about Iran and nuclear weapons, we talked about taxes, we talked about all kinds of issues. But we were walking and getting what's called B-roll to cover the interview, and that's when I asked her, when it came to her worldviews, what newspapers and magazines had she read on a regular basis that helped sort of shape her perspective. And that's when she said,
I've read most of them, again, with a great appreciation for the press, for the media.
But like what one specifically? I'm curious that you...
all of them, any of them that have been in front of me over all these years. I have a vast variety of sources where we get our news to. Alaska isn't a foreign country where it's kind of suggested. It seems like, wow, how could you keep in touch with what the rest of Washington, D.C. may be thinking and doing when you live up there in Alaska? Believe me, Alaska is like a microcosm.
And it's funny, Katie, I remember exactly how you thought of that question. We were on her campaign plane, flying with her to that event in Ohio. And we could see into the first class cabin where Palin and her aides were sitting. And we could see her reading the New York Times. And I remember you're saying, oh, that's interesting. You sort of wouldn't expect her to read the New York Times necessarily because she was and is a very conservative politician. I wonder what else she reads. Would that be an interesting question? And I don't know.
You remember that? I don't even remember that conversation, Brian.
I remember that. And I remember we didn't even write it down as part of the written questions because we just thought it wouldn't yield a particularly interesting answer. And so you just threw it in as part of what we call the walk and talk, not thinking that we would. I mean, I imagine you didn't think we would even use the audio of it.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. And it was interesting because I think her aides realized that it was not going well. And you actually saw someone emailing something on their BlackBerry. What was that, Brian?
I did. During the very first interview you conducted with her in New York during UN Week, we were in a hotel room, and it was very kind of close quarters along the side of that room while you were conducting the interview. And I peered over in a nosy way, and I saw what a very senior McCain aide was typing on his BlackBerry, I think to Steve Schmidt, if I remember correctly, who was running the campaign. And he said, disaster, disaster, expletive.
Mayday,
disaster.
mayday.
Yeah.
Mayday,
so
mayday.
they knew that it was bad. I think we knew that it was bad. I don't think any of us knew how iconic and damaging the interview would be and how it would resonate even all these years later. I think people stop you to mention that interview more than any other work you've done. If I'm correct.
that and my colonoscopy. This was just a different kind of colonoscopy, Brian. By the way, I wasn't sure how this interview would be interpreted or received by the general public. I thought those who liked Governor Palin would like her more because of her authentic kind of homespun style. And I thought those who disliked her would dislike her even more. What I didn't realize was this wide swath of undecided voters, what kind of impact it would have on them in terms of their comfort level supporting someone who seemed to be out of her depth when it came to major policy issues. Well, one thing that interview showed loud and clear, Brian, is that vice presidential candidates can make or break a campaign.
Well, yeah,
and
usually the rule is nobody votes for vice president, but sometimes they do, or sometimes they vote against somebody's choice for vice president, and there is evidence that Palin hurt McCain. But I think you were just about to do a wonderful transition to our interview, which I interrupted.
That's okay, Brian. Bill Weld is running for vice president. He is a old political hand, or a political hand of long standing. Governor Weld was a two-time governor of the state of Massachusetts, and in '96 he lost his Senate race to John Kerry. Then he was nominated by Bill Clinton to be ambassador to Mexico. In late May, or I guess in mid-May, May 17th to be exact, Gary Johnson named Bill Weld as his running mate for the Libertarian ticket for President of the United States. And Bill Weld is here to talk about that. Hi, Governor. How are you?
Katie, it's a great pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, this is a very exciting time for you, but the clock is ticking. What the hell are you doing this for, Governor Weld?
I have a bad character, I guess, because I really enjoy this stuff. And this year of all years, to have a chance to participate in that with a guy I've known for a long time, Governor Gary Johnson. He and I overlapped as governors and think the world of. And we have very similar backgrounds, fiscally conservative, socially inclusive. And, the two establishment party candidates are leaving a little bit of room in the middle for an alternative. Matter of fact, that's an understatement, kind of a 6-lane highway.
Well, we're going to get into sort of a lot of the issues and your perspective on this campaign in a moment, but I want listeners to have a better idea of who you are and why you're here, as Admiral Stockdale famously said during one of those debates. You may not be originally from Boston, but I think you're kind of the ultimate Boston Brahmin. Wouldn't you say so?
I don't know about that. I was raised in Long Island, New York, and went to school in Massachusetts, never really left. But my family was from Massachusetts on both sides up until the 19th century.
Yeah, I think that's kind of an understatement. Your ancestor, I've read, Edmund Weld, was among the earliest students ever at Harvard College, class of 1650, where 2 buildings and 2 professorships are named for your family.
Wasn't Edmund Weld the one who was expelled for stealing horses? There was a sheep in there.
I read something about that. I didn't know what farm animals he got into trouble for, though.
Well, I was attacked by the local Irish Senate president who gave St. Patrick's Day breakfast for my ancestors having come over on the Mayflower. And I said, no, that's not true at all. They sent the servants over to get the cottage ready for them. And after that, I didn't hear anything much about that issue. They just thought that was so funny.
Well, and most politicians try to claim to have been born in a log cabin they built themselves. So right. I think your honesty was pretty refreshing there.
It wasn't even honest, but I got away with it.
Were you Kennedy-esque in terms of politics being ingrained in you from a very early age? How did you get into this old crazy business?
Well, I didn't think I was going to be in politics growing up. I thought I was going to be a Latin teacher, but it is true that my father was active in Republican politics in Eastern Long Island. And, he took me to meet people and go to rallies age, 14, 15. So to that extent, I knew that politics was considered to be a noble calling in our family, put it that way, from both my parents.
And you got your start in politics as a lawyer, not as an elected official. You were appointed, as I recall, by President Reagan to be U.S. Attorney for Massachusetts. What was that experience like?
Well, that was terrific. Possibly the best job I ever had. That's the federal prosecutor for Massachusetts. And I went on from there to be head of the criminal division of the Justice Department in Washington. So I had a lot of law enforcement experience under Reagan. My first job in, quote, politics, close quote, was actually working as a staffer for Senator Javits of New York, writing foreign policy speeches. That's before I even went to law school. And then my second job was sharing an office with a young Yale law grad named Hillary Rodham on the Nixon impeachment, the House Judiciary staff. And we literally wrote the book or the pamphlet on what constitutes grounds for impeachment of a president.
And whatever happened to her?
She's gone on to great things. But I'll tell you a funny story. So 25 years after that, we did that in 73, 74. So I think January of 99, I get a call from John Podesta, who's in the White House as chief of staff at that point. He says, looks like they're going to proceed against my guy. And we've looked around, and it seems that there are only two people in the country who really know a lot about what the law of impeachment is. And the other one is very much disqualified by interest. So you're going to have to testify as an expert witness on the law, which I did.
And what did you think of Hillary Rodham back in the day? What were your impressions of her as a young lawyer?
Well, she's obviously smart and disciplined, and I've, over the years, always described her as a great kid. And the truth is, we were both kids then. We were both in our 20s.
What sort of stood out to you? I mean, other than the fact that she was smart, can you give us more insights into sort of how she operated, her character, her sense of humor, her whatever?
Well, I would say both good. Both character and sense of humor good. And she presented as straight, not as a Nixon hater. There were some people on that staff who just couldn't wait to bring down Dick Nixon and perhaps shouldn't have been on that staff. But no, I would say she was pretty straightforward.
You then moved home to Boston following your stint in the Reagan Justice Department and ran for governor as a Republican in a state where I think fewer than 20% of the registered voters at the time were Republican.
That's correct.
What was that like?
Well, I was beaten very badly at the state Republican convention in the spring of 1990, and just got lucky in September. The race kind of broke my way, so I won the primary by a little bit. And then the Democratic Party split right down the middle. And the fellow who had beaten me for Attorney General 12 years earlier, very badly beaten me, did not get the nomination. And John Silber, who was the president of Boston University, did. He was ahead of me most of the way, but then he had a couple of blow-ups on TV with Natalie Jacobson and then Leslie Stahl in the closing 10 days of the campaign. And I think we won by 1 point, something like that. But it was classic.
I remember interviewing him when I was at NBC and he was running. And I remember how ornery he was and how what a short fuse he had. And it didn't really work well for him when it came to talking to reporters or doing interviews.
You know, in a way, he was very good copy. There's, and we were two people who were not afraid of the microphone.
Can you describe a little bit the experience of being governor of Massachusetts, being a Republican who was successful in an overwhelmingly Democratic place?
Well, I mean, it was a tremendously enjoyable experience. I had very good staff led by Charlie Baker, who's now the governor of Massachusetts. He was my secretary in both health and then later finance. And I brought a bunch of people over from the U.S. Attorney's Office who were very experienced investigators, prosecutors. Nobody came near us with any improper suggestions because they knew we were all federal prosecutors. So that was a plus. We were able to cut taxes 21 times and never have a tax increase. And that, you ask about the first term and the experience, that's the dominant feature of the first term is taxes went down, spending went down. We actually cut spending in real dollars. And when the small and medium business community saw that, they had the confidence to add jobs. So we went from being the state with the highest unemployment rate among the then 11 industrial states in the country at the beginning of my first term to having the lowest unemployment rate among those 11 states at the end of my first term. That's where the big reelect came from. It was the economy. It wasn't because we were such great guys.
Let's talk about, you say that you agree with the Governor Johnson in terms of you'd like to limit foreign intervention for regime change, but are you really comfortable as a libertarian, or you are more libertarian-ish?
Oh, no, I'm running as myself. I'm not running with a copy of the Libertarian platform in my pocket any more than I ran with a copy of the Republican platform in my pocket when I was running as a Republican. I mean, I never bought into the Republican social policies. They were anti-abortion. I was pro-choice. They were so-so at best about gays and lesbians. I was out there for the entire decade of the 90s on gay and lesbian issues, promoting civil rights, promoting marriage equality. I also think that we have to be darn sure that we maintain and demonstrate military supremacy for the United States in both naval and air power, because I know that people all over the world look at that like hawks.
I know you said that you don't follow the Libertarian platform to the letter. On the other hand, your running mate, Gary Johnson, has taken a number of positions personally where there seems to be some difference between the two of you. Can we go through a few of Johnson's positions and get your views? Yeah. In 2012, he advocated cutting the federal government nearly in half, a 43% cut. Do you think that that's realistic?
I think we're aiming at 20% now. And I often have said before I teamed up with Gary Johnson, I've never seen a layer of government that didn't have 10 or 20% excess spending in it. And I'm not talking about the words people always use, waste, fraud, and abuse. I'm talking about programs that shouldn't be there in the first place, ill-conceived programs.
Like what?
A bureaucracy that nobody can tell you quite what they do. I mean, I think there's probably even more of that at the federal level than there is at the state level. But
who?
Whose head? No, the guy I follow here is actually a Democrat named David Osborne, who wrote a book called Laboratories of Democracy about how the states can experiment with things. And his recommendation, which I've always followed, and I think probably Charlie Baker after me has followed, is to zero base the budget. You don't assume that you have last year's appropriation plus 5%, which is what they assume in Washington. You assume every account is zero starting off. And then you look at the results of last year. And if the result of this preventive health program was marvelous outcomes and saved lots of money and improved people's lives, you might multiply that appropriation by 12. None of this 10% across the board stuff. Then you get to a bureaucracy, and it could be the Department of Education, it could be the Department of Commerce, it could be Homeland Security. We have our thoughts, but you want to examine them, and that might be a zero. So that's how you really get budget savings. And I did, as governor in Massachusetts, cut spending in real dollars from year to year at the beginning when I took office. And each of Gary Johnson and Bill Weld were rated the most fiscally conservative governor in the United States back in the 90s. And that's something that's got to be done now in Washington. And both the establishment party candidates have said, oh, no, we're not going to touch entitlements. We're going to bigger this, bigger that. We're not so sure about that.
Let me go down this laundry list if I could, Governor. Maybe you can just give me a yay or nay, a thumbs up or a thumbs down on some of Gary Johnson's positions. Marijuana legalization, yay or nay?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Treat it like alcohol. I think alcohol is probably more harmful than marijuana.
Deep Six Common Core.
Oh, very much so. And the reason I say that is we put in high-stakes tests in 4th, 8th, and 10th grade in Massachusetts, and after they kicked in, Massachusetts was number 1 in the country in reading and math every single year. And if we went to Common Core in Mass, it would be a real downturn. If I had been the governor of Mississippi or Louisiana, I might feel differently. But I don't want to be part of a race to the bottom when I'm on top.
No government involvement in fighting climate change. Something tells me, Governor, you're not that jiggy with that.
Yeah, right. That would be correct. No, I've been quite active in the environmental area. And I would say to Ed Crane, who's the head of the Cato Institute, even in the old days when I went out to his annual meetings, the one part where I, get off the bus is environmental enforcement, just because the economies of scale are so great, you cannot rely on the market of individuals and businesses to protect us all from environmental degradation. And Gary agrees with that. He says, look, the purpose of government, a major purpose of government is to restrain people from injuring each other. And if it's, one polluter polluting a river, okay, that's very obvious. But if it's millions of polluters polluting the atmosphere, it's the same principle.
No to mandatory vaccines.
Well, I don't have flu shots myself. I represented the federal.
We're talking about vaccines for children, Governor.
Oh, you mean like polio and that? Sure, absolutely. That's fine. Discretionary.
So, there shouldn't be mandatory vaccines for children, for babies, for infants.
No, if you mean polio, tetanus, that sort of thing, no, that's perfectly fine.
MMR, all sorts of vaccines. That's very controversial.
Yeah, no, I would not agree there should be no mandatory vaccines for children. I don't agree with that.
So you believe there should be mandatory vaccines? Right. I just want to make sure I'm getting this straight.
Yes.
He claims the no-fly list is error-prone and it shouldn't be used to deny gun purchases. Are you cool with that?
I think Gary and I have had some influence on each other over the course of this year, and I think that I've had some influence on his thinking in the foreign policy area. He's had some influence on my thinking in criminal justice reform, treating possessory narcotics offenses, for example, as a public health emergency as opposed to a fit candidate for criminal treatment and lengthy sentences.
So if you're on the no-fly list, do you think you should be able to purchase a gun?
Well, I think before you can purchase a gun, there have to be some further questions like, why are you on the no-fly list? And I think Senator Collins of Maine has proposed a kind of compromise legislation that seemed to me, when I read it, to address the situation, preserve people's rights, but have short waiting periods when they get to clear their name and say, I shouldn't be on this list.
All right, we're going to go to a break in a moment, but the final thing on my little laundry list, raise Social Security retirement to 75.
72 is what I have heard from Gary, and I agree with that. And I agree with him very much that if we do nothing about Social Security, and I do favor raising the retirement age, I do favor imposing a means test. If we do nothing, it's not going to be there for the next generation. And that's what a lot of all this brouhaha about the millennials is about. I think they understand that if we put our heads in the sand and do nothing about the entitlement programs, they won't be there for the generation that's now 18 to 34 years old.
But do you think it's acceptable for somebody who works with his hands or as a laborer, a coal miner, somebody who works in a factory, for that person to have to work to age 72 before collecting any benefits?
Well, maybe you can jigger with the program to have exceptions, but generally people haven't wanted exceptions with Social Security. That's why people have opposed the means test. So.
I think that's insane. Why shouldn't there be a means test? I mean, let's be honest. You don't need Social Security, Governor.
Right.
I don't need Social Security. I'd be happy to say no. It was interesting. I used to talk to my mom and dad about it, and they were savers and were very frugal. And I'd say, Mom and Dad, do you really need Social Security? They're like, yes, we do. But to me, it just seems ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I mean, to say there should be no means test is a non-starter in my book. And yet, people say, no, we're not going to touch Social Security in any respect because they think it's a third rail because they don't want to actually talk through the issues. And I think Gary and I are not afraid to talk through these issues.
Well, there's another argument about not imposing a means test on Social Security, which a lot of Democrats make. You don't want it to become a welfare program that only benefits people who are less well off, because then the political constituency for Social Security declines over time.
I understand. And people on the left side of things fiscally want everything to be an entitlement. The extreme example is Senator Sanders. And I think Senator Clinton has picked up a lot of the Sanders program in her primary tussle with him.
Well, speaking of Hillary Clinton, when we come back, we're going to talk about who you're siphoning votes from, Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump, and what you think about that. We'll be back with more from Bill Weld right after this.
Katie, trips to the post office have No, I'm sorry.
I haven't been to a post office in 25 years.
Yeah, I know. You have minions for that.
Yes, exactly. Like you, Brian.
Yeah. Trips to the post office have probably become second nature to you. They seem easy because you've been doing all your mailing and shipping that way for so long. But think about all the hassle, driving to the post office, dropping what you're doing, finding parking, waiting,
and all those annoying people who are in line.
Yeah, people are the worst. But there's a much better way, Stamps.com. Stamps.com is the easy and convenient way to get postage right from your desk. Buy and print official U.S. postage using your own computer and printer. With Stamps.com, there's no guesswork. They make it easy to get exact postage for any letter, any package, any class of mail, the instant you need it. No expensive postage meters to lease and no more trips to the post office.
Sign me up.
That was a pretty powerful endorsement. So sign up for Stamps.com and use our promo code
Katie
for this special offer. You get a 4-week trial plus a $110 bonus offer, including postage and a digital scale. So don't wait. Go to Stamps.com. Before you do anything else, click on the microphone at the top of the homepage and type in Katie. That's Stamps.com. Enter Katie.
With so many monumental events happening around us, it's important to learn the history and details that led up to some of these moments. And that's why we love the Great Courses Plus video learning service. It offers great video lectures across so many topics: politics, history, philosophy, even cooking and how to play chess, 2 things I'm really bad at. They're presented by award-winning professors and experts. So remember when you would cut class in college and never, I signed up for diplomatic history with this really famous historian, but it was at 8:00 on Thursday mornings, and I just never got up for that class. So now I can learn about diplomatic history with the Great Courses Plus. You get unlimited access to all of their lectures. New courses are added every month. There's always something new to learn, and you can stream these lectures anytime, anywhere.
We just watched their course called The Skeptic's Guide to American History. It was really interesting and unconventional and very much worth listening to. So right now, as one of our listeners, you'll immediately get an entire month of unlimited access to all of the Great Courses Plus lectures for free when you sign up. So start your free month today by going to thegreatcoursesplus.com/Katie.
Remember, thegreatcoursesplus.com/Katie. We're back with Massachusetts Governor Bill Weld, who is currently running for Vice President of the United States, part of the Libertarian ticket with Gary Johnson. I asked for questions, Governor Weld, from people who follow me on Twitter, and many asked if you were hurting Hillary Clinton and were actually enabling a Trump presidency, how you would feel about that.
First of all, we're not out to hurt anybody, unlike the 2 establishment party candidates who seemingly, like the 2 parties they represent, want to kill each other. As near as I can tell, to this point, we draw votes pretty equally from the 2 establishment parties. Something of a surprise to me. I would have thought they would almost all come from Mr. Trump, because my appeal would be to moderate Republicans. And there's a bunch of moderate Republicans who are not too comfortable with Mr. Trump and might even stay home. And given, our ticket, 2 successful but genial Republican governors, 2 terms each, they might very well come our way. And I think we're getting our share of that. And I think as the weeks wear on and people focus more intently on the race and the issues, it'll be easier for me to make the case that what Mr. Trump says about having a closed economy, no foreign trade, that sort of thing, it just is incoherent. So I think as we go on, more votes are going to come from Trump.
And there seemed to be a little bit of a divide on 60 Minutes between you and your running mate on this particular issue, Trump and Clinton. That is, Steve Croft said, you seem less comfortable with the idea of Donald Trump as president than Hillary Clinton. And you said something like, well, I think you're a pretty astute observer.
Did well in school.
You did well in school. And I think Gary Johnson basically said, they're equally rotten. So if the evidence mounts that your candidacy is enabling a Trump presidency, would you consider, as Carl Bernstein speculated in the last few days, dropping out?
Well, I can tell there's some nervousness over at Clinton headquarters because I've received several dozen emails unsolicited from people I don't know in the last 2 days saying, "You are a pariah. You're awful. You're going to go down in history. You're worse than Hitler. You're going to enable a Trump presidency. Every vote you take away, millennial, from Hillary Clinton is a stain upon your honor and that of your ancestors and your children." I mean, very strong stuff, obviously orchestrated. They all came out of a clear blue sky. So I know there's some nervousness over there, but, I would say go get your votes. Go hold on to your votes. Gary and I did not get into this because we wanted to please anybody in particular. We certainly didn't get into it to please people in other countries by our support of free trade. We think free trade benefits the U.S. economy, and I'm pretty sure we're right about that. But people say, you're against American workers because you're for free trade. I mean, that is just totally incoherent.
Well, no matter what your motivation, though, Governor, I mean, are you prepared to be seen as a spoiler, sort of the Ralph Nader of this race, if in fact you do siphon votes from Hillary Clinton and help usher in a Donald Trump presidency? Are you ready for that? Because if we do a reality check, let's be honest, you're probably not going to win.
Well, we're going to try. We're going to make our case. And when you get done hearing what I have to say about Mr. Trump and rounding up 11 million people and deporting them and building a wall with Mexico and having a closed economy and no free trade whatsoever, and bring back the Smoot-Hawley tariffs that brought on the Great Depression and arm the Japanese and the South Koreans with nuclear weapons. I mean, the list is almost inexhaustible.
But Governor Weld, that's well and good, but people have been criticizing Donald Trump for those very issues for months now, and it doesn't seem to have a major effect on his candidacy. So are you being naive by suggesting, as people become more aware of some of his positions, that his support is going to wane? Because he seems to be increasing his support, and it's getting close to D-Day.
Well, I think it can only be good for the country, frankly, for people to become aware of what alternatives there are in this election year. And neither of the other parties represents the combination of fiscal responsibility and social inclusiveness that we represent. So that's really my answer to that whole line of attack.
Well, I'll give you a theory that was posited by somebody who knows you, who said the following, and you can tell me whether you think this is true or not. This person said, you were going to be another Republican who endorsed Hillary because you have a long and warm relationship with her. And then Johnson called you out of the clear blue sky, said, you could be his running mate. It gave you an opportunity to put yourself and your issues kind of back on center stage. And you thought, as you said, that you would take more votes from Trump than from Clinton. So kind of a win-win all around. Is any of that accurate?
I can't remember having a specific plan at any point to endorse Mrs. Clinton. The part about Trump is true.
But a specific plan, did you have any intention of endorsing Hillary Clinton?
I don't recall that coming up before Gary called me, no. I mean, it's no secret that I think she's qualified to be president, and I do not think Donald Trump is qualified to be president.
So if push comes to shove, will you drop out as if in fact it's shown?
That doesn't
Absolutely
follow
not.
At all. I've never called on anybody else to drop out of a political race or not run in the first place, and equally not persuaded to listen to that kind of counsel, even from well-meaning folks. And in addition to the orchestrated emails, I've heard from some New York friends of mine that they're worried about Mrs. Clinton, and that's a lot has been written about that in recent days. It's called bedwetting, but that's
is that what it's
my
called?
fault. Yeah, nervousness about the Clinton prospects. And I don't know. I guess I'm old school Massachusetts politics. Never let him see you sweat.
Or P, I guess. Mitt Romney and other leading anti-Trump Republicans have said, hey, if Bill Weld were on the top of the ticket, we'd support them. But Gary Johnson, not so much. And I have to ask you about some of his gaffes. He didn't know what Aleppo was, as you saw, and you talked about that on 60 Minutes. He was asked by Mike Barnicle on Morning Joe.
What would you do if you were elected about Aleppo?
About?
Aleppo.
And what is Aleppo?
You're kidding.
No.
Aleppo is in Syria. It's the epicenter of the refugee crisis.
Okay, got it.
And apparently, according to the New Yorker, he had never heard of Harriet Tubman. Could that be?
Maybe she's better known in the East than the West. I don't know. I will tell you, I hear a lot in Massachusetts and New York from old friends of mine, you should be on top of the ticket. And when I get west of the Mississippi with Gary, guess who gets mobbed at the airports? It's not me. And we don't hear anything about flipping the ticket.
But until January, your running mate, Mr. Johnson, was CEO of a marijuana company. He hadn't heard of Aleppo, as Katie mentioned. Do you think he's ready and qualified on day one to be president of the United States?
No, Gary is very sharp, and he showed a lot of sand and grit in New Mexico and kind of shocked the establishment there by winning. He was at 1% when he started. And he had a big impact fiscally. He vetoed 750 spending bills, and he was overridden twice. And the legislature was pretty close to 2-1 Democratic. So he knows how to talk to the people and make things stick. He does not have, an Oscar Wilde facility with language. But, I thought I was a pretty good chess player. And Gary and I have now played twice, and he beat me both times. And I had master points, and he taught himself. So, and then you look at some of his other characteristics like driving himself as an athlete. He's a professional quality Ironman triathlete and has climbed the tallest mountain in all 7 continents. So he's a driven individual, and he's got plenty.
I saw him doing a backflip on 60 Minutes
off
in his spandex. That was quite a treat.
Diving board with no spring in it. But he's a driven person, and obviously he's run for president of the United States twice now. He has plenty of ambition. He also has plenty of humility. And people sometimes mistake that for something else, goofiness or something. They say, how come this guy isn't saying, I'm the greatest? He's talking around the issue. Why doesn't he just come out and say, I'm the greatest? Well, you'll never hear that from Gary Johnson.
He's would you say that he's a bit quirky? Is that a fair way to describe him?
I think he's quirky. I think I'm a bit quirky. They're different quirks. But I think the overwhelming thing about Gary is his humility. He reminds me in many ways of Abraham Lincoln, who, I asked Gary, how do you climb these mountains? He said, I put one foot in front of the other. That's how I do all my athletic stuff. And Lincoln, you may remember, was asked, how long should a man's legs be? Because Lincoln was very tall. And they wanted him to say, long, like mine. And he said, long enough to reach the ground. So they both have kind of homespun wisdom, and I refer to Gary as Honest Gary on the campaign trail. It's the one undertaking we made to each other when Leslie and I flew out and shook with him on the deal after he and I talked on the telephone. Is we're going to tell the truth to each other and to the public throughout this campaign. And Gary is obsessed with telling the truth, which is why sometimes he seems painfully honest.
And yet when I mention Gary Johnson to people I know who aren't following the day-to-day of politics, the first word inevitably that comes up is some variant of pothead. How do you respond to that? Do you think that's just sort of a bias we have toward alcohol against marijuana? Or do you think there's a sense that, he's been on drugs for too long?
Oh, no. He's got a mind like a steel trap, honestly. I've been in a lot of plotting and scheming conversations with him, and this guy has a rat trap mind. It's just that, I said I was out there by myself for the decade of the 90s on gay and lesbian issues. Gary was out there by himself on legalizing marijuana for a decade as well. It was a decade after that. And so he came to be identified with that. And while there are 100 million Americans who have smoked marijuana, there are a lot who haven't, and to them it's just so alien, even if they're knocking back a couple of stiff ones every evening. So it's, I think, fear of the unknown. But if you look at, and I say Gary has influenced me on some issues, this is one of them. If you look at the statistics, you have legal prescription pills killing 30,000 people a year, and marijuana killing, I don't know how many people, 0 a year. That's a factor that's worth taking into account. And
can I ask you, Governor, why you think we're in the state we're in when it comes to this campaign? Why do you think Donald Trump has caught fire, and why is he enjoying really such such support across the country? And I suggest, by the way, I would recommend you not use the phrase basket of deplorables, just
In my
FYI.
Good tip.
So I don't know why he's gotten as far as he has. I aim to find out between now and November 8th, because we're going to have, even if not in the debates, and we could still get in the second and third debates, we're going to have a seat at the table and a platform to voice analyses. And I've been.
But certainly, you must have some idea, Governor. I mean, you're an astute observer of politics for many decades now.
Well, I do have an idea.
What is he appealing to?
Yeah, no. What he's doing with almost every breath is to try to set group against group and set people's teeth on edge against each other and stir up negative emotions, beginning with envy, then going on to resentment, and ultimately hatred. Not too strong a word with his treatment of Muslim. And he's had some success there by appealing to the very worst angels of our nature. And it's a sad thing. So I think the more sunlight that can be shined on that, the better. And I'm going to be there trying to do that in the next 7 weeks. But it's the most negative and unappealing run of statements and initiatives and feints and dodges and lies and prevarications that I've seen in my lifetime. And as you said, I've been around politics for a while.
It doesn't seem to stick. I mean, the sort of the Teflon candidate is such an overused phrase, but I mean, he is beyond Teflon, it seems to me.
Well, let's hope that when people are window shopping that they're willing to put up with a lot for some entertainment value, but then at the end of the day, when they have to actually walk in the booth and cast a vote, that they'll be focused more on the merits.
But it's striking. You've described all the reasons that he's hateful and terrible, and his policies are going to potentially start a new depression. And you even compared his immigration plan to Kristallnacht, which for people who don't know, or worse. And yet he's tied with the Democratic nominee. So where is this coming from?
No, I mean, go figure. He retweeted pictures of George Lincoln Rockwell. You're too young to remember.
I'm not.
He was the founder of the American Nazi Party. So Mr. Trump gets called on this. Why are you retweeting George Lincoln Rockwell? It's nothing. It was an accident. It was a joke. Don't worry about it. Baloney. It's a dog whistle. And, the white supremacists will say, yeah, we know Donald is with us. And, we don't care that he took it back and said he wasn't serious about tweeting the picture of the founder. So it's just it's a terrible campaign on so many levels that it sets new standards, low standards for American politics.
And speaking of low standards, I think Trump's only response to you personally was when you made the Kristallnacht comment. His campaign put out a statement in which he said, and I'm quoting here, "I don't talk about his alcoholism, so why would he talk about my foolishly perceived fascism?"
Yeah. Well, if he wants to plead guilty to fascism, I'll plead guilty to drinking wine.
Conversely, Governor, why do you think Hillary Clinton is having so much trouble, that young woman you met in your 20s and called a really great kid?
I don't understand it, and I say so to everyone who will listen. I don't get it, but obviously it's there. At one point, Trump was at 70% unfavorable, and she was at 68 or something like that. I don't understand it, and it may be that the negativity of the Republican primary season has slopped over into the general election, and everyone thinks they're supposed to be all upset about everything all the time. But the negative tone of the two establishment parties, I think we may make an issue out of that, saying, look, we're not being negative. Here's what we think. We are an alternative, and we hope that may have an effect.
How much do you think the criticism of Hillary Clinton is imbued by sexism?
Oh, I'm always prepared to look for misogyny behind every tree. I think women have had a hard time getting fair treatment.
Do you think she has a problem with honesty and trustworthiness? Those have become the kind of buzzwords for people who oppose Clinton.
Yeah, I may get crosswise with Gary here, but no, I don't think that. I mean, I think it's not a stretch to say there is some pay-to-play aspects to the relationship between the foundations and the government. And I wish that the Huma Abedin emails had come from her as well as from Huma. But in the scheme of things, that doesn't match the level of shouting that's going on by everybody else.
So what's the path to victory, Governor Weld?
The path to victory for me and Johnson is to solve our quantitative problem or issue, and that's that only 35% of the people know who we are. I don't think we have a qualitative problem because I think we've got the best ticket, the most experience, and the best platform, which is to do what's necessary on the budget and also to be the opposite of what Mr. Trump is on social issues. So if we put our story in front of people, I don't have too much doubt as to the outcome. You're right, Katie. Time is flying, and we've got 7 weeks to do that in. What gives me some ground for optimism here is that it's in the last 4 weeks of the election that people really do focus with laser-like intensity on the issues and on the options. And it's going to be hard for them to ignore us altogether if we get even a modicum of earned media exposure in those 7 weeks.
But if you don't get into any of the debates, do you think that there's any chance that you could win?
It's a very long putt. But then I saw Justin Leonard's 57-foot putt at the Brookline Country Club live to win the Davis Cup for the United States. That's a long putt that went in.
Nice to have the common touch at the Brookline Country Club, isn't it, Governor?
That's right.
Before we go, I just have to ask you, what newspapers and magazines have you read that have helped establish your worldview?
I read the New York Times.
I hope you got that joke, Governor, by the way. It seems to have fallen flat.
No, I got it. But
he smiled. I'm in the room with him. He smiled.
My reading habits have maybe shifted to making sure that I absorb the Times and the Journal. I read foreign affairs. I read a lot in international affairs.
And you're a writer. I can't let you go before mentioning that you've written 3 books.
Yeah, and also, and you don't know this, Katie, but I have a memoir in the can that's 475 pages long, and that's without the fatal phone call from Gary Johnson in May of 2016. So it's going to have to elongate a little bit, and then it will really be too long to read.
Oh, I'm sorry, Governor. How many pages?
475 and counting.
Oh, God. Well, yes, you're definitely going to have to do an epilogue for that. It should be a fascinating month for you. I hope you drink coffee because you're going to need plenty of it.
That's entirely true. I'm a 3.5 cup a day man already.
All right. Well, up that to 5. Governor Bill Weld, thanks so much for spending some time with us talking about this Stranger Than Fiction campaign, and good luck on the trail.
Thanks so much, Katie. Brian, thanks.
Thanks. We want to thank Gianna Palmer, Greta Cohn, and the Reverend John Delore for producing the show. Zach Dinerstein mixed this episode. Special thanks, as always, to Mark Phillips for our fantastic theme music. And most of all, thank you for listening. If you want to leave us a message, please do so at 929-224-4637. And please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. It really does help other listeners to find the show. It helps Apple with their search algorithm to list our show more prominently for people to see. So please subscribe, rate, and review. So we'll talk to you next time.
Hey folks, it's me, Mark Maron. And if you love podcasts you don't want to miss, now hear this. A really big podcasting festival coming in October to the Los Angeles area. Come see me and lots of shows you love. More than 30 great podcasts live on 6 stages. It'll be a weekend full of laughs, storytelling, and your favorite hosts up close. You've got earwolf favorites like Comedy Bang Bang and with special guest Lauren Lapkus, plus more great shows like Brilliant Idiots, Criminal, and The Moth. And I'm doing a special WTF as well. Do a VIP pass for meet and greets with your favorite hosts. Sit up close in reserved seating. Hang out in the VIP lounge and get more special perks as well. It all happens at Now Hear This, October 28th through the 30th in Anaheim, California, right near Los Angeles. Don't miss it. Go to nowhearthisfest.com to buy your tickets. Okay? Good. Great.
This has been an Earwolf production, executive produced by Scott Ackerman and Chris Bannon. For more information and content, visit earwolf.com.